everyone. It's lovely to see you. My name is Jo Aplin. I'm a professor in the history of art here at the Courtauld. I'm also director of the Courtauld Centre for the Art of the Americas, and it's under the aegis of that centre that tonight's event is taking place. So just to tell you a bit about the centre, it supports and fosters advanced research that thinks critically and creatively about American art in its broadest sense. Since its formation in 2016, we've undertaken a really rich roster of successful activities, including hosting an annual postdoctoral fellow and visiting speakers, artists, writers and scholars from around the world. Our goal is to use the Centre's convening power as an international platform for new ideas and approaches through this dynamic range of workshops, symposia and exhibition events, something we feel is important now more than ever to keep thinking critically together about what this project of American art and its broader, expanded cognate looks like today. Tonight's event is co-organised by Alex Bispham and Pia Gottschaller, and I'm just going to introduce them both before handing over to Alex, who's going to introduce tonight's speaker. So I shall leave that to you, Alex. Alex is a PhD student at the Courtauld, working on a thesis titled Painting the Unseen, Queerness and Alternative Spirituality in Contemporary Art. Employing a queer methodology, Alex argues that the spiritual and material are intertwined and argues for artworks that are both vehicles of transcendence and enact material change in the physical world. Dr. Pia Gottschaller is a technical art historian here on faculty at the Courtauld, with a specialisation in Latin American, US American and European post-war painting practice. She's previously worked at Harvard Art Museums, the Whitney Museum of American Art, Tate and the Menil Collection in Houston, where she was Andrew Mellon Fellow. She's published widely, and her books include Making Art Concrete, works from Argentina and Brazil, 2 books on Lucio Fontana, and another on Blinky Palermo. And Pia's latest book, Unruly Tools, Contemporary Artist and the Reinvention of Painting, is due out, I think, later this year with Getty Publications. So I will now hand over to Alex to do the important introductions of the evening after those. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jo. And before I introduce Devan, also thank you to everyone at the Research Forum. Thank you, Diego. Thank you, Romy. I'm so delighted to introduce Devan Shimoyama to you this evening. Born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Devan is now based in Pittsburgh, where he previously taught at Carnegie Mellon University after receiving his MFA from Yale University School of Art. Since then, he's established a scintillating and rich visual language in painting, collage, and sculpture, with which he depicts the Black, queer male body, often his own or that of friends and family. I have the privilege of spending a lot of time looking at and thinking about Devan's work as part of my doctoral research, and in a minute I will let him actually present to you a selection of his work and tell you about his practice. But by way of introduction, I just wanted to share a couple of my thoughts on why he's such a compelling artist and person to engage with. Principally a painter, Devan works not only with oil, acrylic and flash, but a whole host of lustrous materials that range from fine glitter and sequins to pieces of costume jewellery or larger synthetic flowers, or even an entire jam sport backpack on one of your larger works, which you've also got one with you today. But there's a real sensitivity in his coloured pencil portraits that often sit just behind the diaphanous veil of colour. And all of those materials and objects hold meaning for him, whether that's a reminder of the women who raised him or the transcendence experienced during Friends drag performances. And I think performativity is a really key word then. These works really put on a show for us. At the same time, his materials and his subject matter, through his materials and his subject matter, Devan destabilizes so many of our assumptions about gender and about race. So even though many of these references are incredibly personal, he transforms sites of pain into spaces of reverence and of remembrance, whether it's popular culture, folklore, mythology, or fantasy world building. Not only Devan, but his works amplify Black queer joy. Before I hand over to you, I want to do a tiny bit of promotion on your behalf, which is that Devan is currently in London until the end of the month on an artist residency at Plop, and they are hosting an open studio this Saturday from 6 to 8 p.m. just at Bomb Art Factory in Holborn. You'll be presenting your work, and also Asif Hock, who is also the second of this month's artists. So I'm sure both of them would love to see perhaps some new or familiar faces there. We'll hand over to you to present your work, and then afterwards Pia and I will perhaps open with some questions before handing over to the rest of you for any questions you might have. Just know that Romy will come around with a microphone so that your question will be heard. And then finally, we hope you'll join us for some wine and maybe carry on the conversation in the research forum, which is just over to your right when you come out. We're very excited. And really excited for you, Devan. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here, and thank you, Alex, for bringing me out here. It's like a really great coincidental timing and everything. It's been really lovely being able to talk to you remotely, and then also get to see you in Pittsburgh as well. So to show you the work in person. Yeah, I will be sharing some work that I've made here while in London the last few weeks. I got here on the 1st. And I've been making some very nerdy portrait drawings of Dungeons and Dragons characters that I've embodied over the years of my playing the game, and that's sort of a whole other project that I'm starting and sort of embarking on that's quite different from what I'll be talking about now. But if you have questions about that later, I'm more than happy and excited to talk about that as well. Yeah, so this is an image of a small object that usually I keep on my person. It's just like, it's called a slammer. It's from this game called Pogs from when I was a kid. My mother gave it to me, and it's funny just talking about it right before starting this, and somebody else said that you have the same image on another sort of brooch or something like that that was given to you from a grandmother. And so, yeah, I always put this image at the front of my presentations because it's sort of this representation of kind of being watched over by female or feminine energy. I was raised in a household full of Black women who nurtured me and, made sure that I was in a safe place and could express myself however I saw fit. And so that's kind of a running theme throughout my work. There's often going to be depictions of different people with women's mouths mostly. I also used to use more imagery of eyes, but the eyes in my work are often embellishments. So just hopping into things, generally speaking about my work, my goal is to uplift the sort of the spirit of the queer Black male or the queer Black body, just generally today in today's social climate. A certain kind of negative view or kind of skewed view about gay male sexuality comes into question in my work, followed by an exploration of locating the queer Black male's body in society in general, even looking into how that exists within the kind of vacuum of Black culture. This is an image of an installation view of an exhibition I had at the Sorlaches Museum in Finland. This exhibition is part of a larger body of work surrounding Black barbershops, and thinking a lot about, in particular, Black stereotype and spaces in which Black masculinity exists, and my own kind of pining to be sort of a part of that, but feeling sort of pushed out from some of those spaces or forced to kind of closet myself in those spaces. This installation is a reiteration of another project that was called Mighty Mighty the Barbershop Project, which I'll show some images of later. But it includes sort of a highly aestheticized barbershop interior space that kind of is hybridized with influences from the basement, where I would get my childhood basement in my home, where I would get my hair cut by my uncle because I felt so kind of uncomfortable in traditional barbershop spaces. What sort of sparked my interest in barbershops was this sort of a twofold thing, this Kerry James Marshall painting from 1993 called The Style. The title references Percy's House of Style, and it's like chic clientele, but also points to the Dutch art movement, the style, spelled differently, which sought to kind of aestheticize the everyday environment and produce universal harmony. This depicts a barbershop full of patrons, thinking of barbershops as this place of Black fraternal bonding and a space in which people can kind of come together and start a movement and really talk politics and create movements for change. And then this painting, School of Beauty, School of Culture from 2012, much later, set in a women's hair salon, also makes a reference, oddly enough, I just saw the painting that I think inspired this. It's here at the National Gallery, I think. Yeah, so I got to see that kind of Sleeping Beauty on the ground here is a skull in the original painting. So I really love Kerry James Marshall's work, and that was a really big influence for this body of work, but also sitting around and thinking about how to make this more immersive and engaging. This is a Pepona Osorio work called No Crying in the Barbershop, which explored Latinx masculinity. This was in 1994. It was an installation that also included some video work. So as you saw in my installation, I also included some altered barber chairs as well. I made a lot of these paintings of fictional patrons in that space. Most of my paintings are mixed media. I'm using, here you can see it's the colored pencil renders the portrait where there is a glaze of a gradient of oil paint over top. There's Swarovski embellishments, sequins on the clothing. There's kind of electrical wire, as well as wood, and then acrylic paint, oil paint, and flash, which is a heavily pigmented vinyl paint. I'm really interested in finding ways of, and I've developed this over years of painting, but really pushing and playing with textures to really celebrate Black hair, as well as the sort of depth and multitude of ways in which Black skin can be represented. This is an image from Mighty Mighty, the Barbershop Project, which was in collaboration with Cultural DC, a nonprofit arts organization in Washington, DC. This was they take like a shipping container, they converted it into an art gallery, and they kind of brought it to different locations and set up for my exhibition, it was a fully functioning barbershop that provided free haircuts to the community. In Washington, D.C., they have a lot of major free museums in the same way that London does, but where all of the Black community is mostly or largely lives is kind of inconveniently far or distance away from a lot of those opportunities to see art or experience it. And so we really just brought this to a neighborhood that was predominantly Black and plopped it right down in there, and then brought the community leaders in to really talk about the project, talk about queerness and Blackness. The barbers that were there offered their time and their services for free to provide those haircuts, which was incredibly generous. They were mostly queer or femme-identifying barbers, which we were really fortunate to have. So to activate that space was really incredible. We had a number of events and offered over 500 haircuts over the summer for free, mostly to youth. The project came back again just last year and was the final project for Cultural DC before they closed their operations, but we provided a number of free haircuts to people outside of the Martin Luther King Jr. Library, and a lot of free haircuts, mostly to the unhoused community there. This is another work, and just to give you an idea of scale, this I don't know centimeters, sorry, but this painting is like this big. 3 feet by 4 feet, 38 by 48 inches. So yeah, most of my paintings are larger than life size, and that's really important to me. I'm really thinking a lot about how scale can kind of present individuals or figures or whatever was represented as something grand or powerful in an almost like mythological or fantastical way. And I'm going to sort of take you now through a bit of the process and how I employ ideas and inspiration taken from pop culture, or in this case, cinema, and follow that through into a body of work. So this was maybe 2020. I started, I really love Halloween. I get dressed up really, it's very serious for me. And I really, all of October, I'm watching like a lot of horror movies. Around this time, I think it was 2019 or 2020, I watched a ton of vintage horror movies, and I was really interested in the idea of the black monster in cinema. And so I looked back and found this film called Vampira, but also called Old Dracula, depending on where you were watching it. I think maybe in America it might have been called Old Dracula because of the popularity of Young Frankenstein. So this is a 1970s blaxploitation kind of horror film. And it's about this character. It's about Count Dracula, obviously. He's an old vampire. Because of his advanced age, he's forced to host tours in his castle to get new victims. He can't just kind of, he's not young and spry anymore. And so he attempts to revive his long-lost love, Vampira, and he wants to find a victim that can kind of handle his this blood transfusion and revive her spirit back into her body. He invites a bunch of Playboy bunnies over to the house, and they're all white except for this young woman who is, this is Teresa Graves, the actress, and she actually is the only one that survives the blood transfusion or the bites, and she wakes up and it's a shock to everybody, she's black, and this is, he does many things to try to, rectify the situation and correct it, because he didn't want her to be black, and yet it doesn't work. No matter what he tries, her blackness is too strong. And he eventually, her blackness turns him black at the very end of the movie, and it's a really interesting and very shocking moment to see. There's blackface obviously involved in it with the actor, but it was kind of so ridiculous. They live happily ever after and go off to Carnival in Rio de Janeiro together at the end of the movie. And so it is a happy ending in a way. But I ended up making these large-scale portraits that are my height, to give you context for the scale of them. But yeah, they're mostly, that whole entire background is a kind of a custom mix of glitters that I've made. And that's oil paint, colored pencil, a large-scale collaged mouth from a different vampiress that's kind of in lineage with her, from another film that I'll talk about in a moment. But yes, I was really interested in this idea of this like powerful, striking woman whose blackness and her femininity is so intense that it kind of overrides the entire situation and takes agency there. And so here's a clip from that towards the end.
Now then, what's all this?
Officer, thank goodness you've arrived.
Thank you, officer.
Sorry about that, sir.
Case of mistaken identity, I'm sure.
That man is Count Dracula.
Could you spell that, sir?
D-R... Don't be so stupid! The man...
So, yeah, they're happy together, and I'm happy for them. Following that, I watched a movie that was heavily influential to me when I was younger, Queen of the Damned. I this is a 2002 horror fantasy film starring R&B superstar Aaliyah, and was based on The Vampire Chronicles by Anne Rice, a character from that from Interview with the Vampire. In that, I was really interested also in her kind of her movements, how she was almost sibilant, snake-like, and serpentine. She also was incredibly powerful in this film, and she had great costume design. I took a lot of time in this painting to focus heavily on her crown itself. I collected a lot of small bits of broken jewelry, semi-precious stones, and things like that. So I have a close-up of that, just to give you an idea of some of the textures happening in there. In this movie, she also has a moment where she is kind of being torn apart by her followers. This is a moment where she's betrayed by all of them. She's kind of the mother of all vampires, and they kind of rip apart at her body and try to take her down. And yet, once again, she is too powerful. I'm going to skip that video, but moving forward, that work inspired me to think about other ways in which Black femininity has been maybe canonized or viewed inaccurately, or maybe just differently than how things might have been if they were written from a different perspective. And so I made these 3 paintings of the Gorgon sisters from Greek mythology and renamed them slightly. This is Sedusa instead of Medusa, which is based loosely off of a Powerpuff Girls villain from when I was a kid. The idea of this ship full of men being sort of struck so intensely by an unfamiliar group of women on a shore of perhaps Libya with rope-like hair to the point where they didn't know what to do. I just thought that could have been locked hair of Black women that are maybe larger bodied or stronger, more taller, and sort of embodying a different type of physical presence and beauty that they were unfamiliar with. And so I was really interested in sort of representing these 3 sisters. And the 3 sisters, the paintings sort of correlate to their age. So the largest one is the eldest sister, which is Steno. And this is the largest one. And so those are silk flowers on the painting there. I started to also think about spaces in which Black femininity is celebrated and showcased. So I went to Miami. I was doing the Fountainhead Fellowship, which is a really wonderful fellowship that brings 3 artists every month to live down there and make some work. We have a studio and living space as well. And I reached out to a drag queen that was based there, that now is based in Chicago. Her name is Miss Toto. She's a Black, queer, non-binary artist, drag artist, who also does bodybuilding and also does drag for change, and does these really incredible events where she gets on a boat and tags sharks. So, that's also something that she's really passionate about. But I followed her and her drag family around for a month, documenting their performances and them getting ready, and really wanted to celebrate some of the gritty behind-the-scenes stuff that was going on as well. I started to also become more aware of these Andy Warhol works as I was working towards my first solo museum exhibition at the Andy Warhol Museum in Pittsburgh. I worked with curator Jessica Beck, who was incredibly insightful, and I learned so much working with her about Warhol and just in general about this body of work that wasn't really exhibited that much at the time. This Ladies and Gentlemen series were, I think, from 1975. They were based off of images that he had taken himself. It was originally a commission. He was only supposed to make so many of them, but he ended up making well over 100 paintings or something like that. And many of those paintings were in an Italian collection, but some of them were also available to be on view. So Jessica actually curated a selection of them on another floor of the museum, and then put this painting in with those works as well, which was a painting of Miss Toto, who came and performed an incredible rendition of, it was really kind of crazy actually. She dressed as a kind of typical mammy type of slave character, and then come on, ride the train, and ride it, and she kind of went through the crowd and took all the black people in the crowd and made a kind of train of people up to the stage, and then performed Runaway with Me by Carly Rae Jepsen at the end in a celebratory, joyous performance, which was, I think for many people in the crowd, jarring, and I love, for me, I love that, and it challenges people in a new and exciting way. But yeah, I'm really interested in these types of conversations that can happen sort of organically, where my work can be in a space where gender identity and queerness and femininity is looked at so differently here. These were not drag performers necessarily. We might identify them more so as trans identifying folks or non-binary people. Most of these individuals were not paid much, if at all, for these photographs or any of the works being made of them, and they weren't identified until much later. And some of them are still, I'm not sure if all of them have been identified. So, my mission in making some of these works was to really celebrate these people, name them, get them more work, more gigs. And so I've had Miss Toto actually organized for my opening, for my solo exhibition in Chicago at Kavi Gupta Gallery. She organized an entire evening of a number of drag performers that we got to pay really well from the gallery, and have them perform for an event. And so I really am always looking for ways in which I can bring people in. This one is a portrait of another friend of hers, who at the time her drag name was Sensitive Black Hottie, but now I think she goes by Ray, which is like a little easier to say, I think, which I'm grateful for. I also was really interested in thinking about the ways in which I had grown up with drag and where I had seen it. Popular culture often uses gay black male coded language in comedy or in music. In general, it's become this thing where sometimes people will call it like internet brain rot, and I'm like, no, that's just like, kind of queer or black coded language. People such as Martin Lawrence, Arsenio Hall, Eddie Murphy, even Prince and Lenny Kravitz are kind of sort of peacocking in this way that's using black male coded language. This is Martin Lawrence as Shanae Jenkins in the show Martin, where he played this character who is really, I sort of am endeared to her. Like, I think she's like hilarious and actually has a lot of heart, but she really, as you can see, is kind of a bit of a joke of a character. She had a catchphrase saying "looky looky." She was kind of antagonistic towards Martin's girlfriend and other female friends, and she was at times, many times, one note and a little bit of a stereotype. You can see that also happening with Jamie Foxx as Wanda Jackson in Living Color. This is Wanda. She was also known as Ugly Wanda in the show. And this was like, looking back on this in retrospect, it's really frustrating to think that this idea of gender being in this sort of in-between state or something like that being viewed as a joke or ugly and ridiculed. Arsenio Hall was in Coming to America in this scene, and in the credits you can see that it's just listed as extremely ugly girl and unattractive female club goer. And so it's just, I actually think he looks really nice. And so there's these really kind of rough things over time that sort of shifts to slightly more well-rounded representations and embodiments of Black femininity, and this type of drag used for comedic effect. I find Respucia from Norbit to be horrible. I don't recommend watching that. But I find Medea to have grown and become a quite rich and layered and complex character. But this sort of pushed me into thinking of these simple gestures of a man in a wig. And I made these self-portraits where I just kind of don the wig in these portraits of these different female or femme icons or idols. This is a self-portrait as Ronnie Spector from the Ronettes, who kind of popularized Amy Winehouse's Beehive. This is Mystique from X-Men. I don't shy away from the things that I kind of just really love, whether that be comic books or certain types of music or anything like that. I try to kind of celebrate all those different things as best I can. This is self-portrait as Katrina. Katrina was the character from that Grace Jones played in this movie Vamp, where she had kind of painted all over her body and performed with it's like finger painting on her body from Keith Haring. It was really incredible. Another black vampire movie. Highly recommend. She's the club owner. This is a self-portrait as Patti LaBelle, which also I could have done the whole series just with Patti LaBelle's hairstyles because she has so many. And thinking about the ways in which I work again, I work in kind of like bodies of work. This is an ongoing one that is coming to a close hopefully very soon. This is Pamela Coleman Smith, who was an early 20th century artist, writer, and mystic. She is her most lasting artistic contribution is, and most notable is her illustrations for the most popularized tarot decks that you might see. So if you were to look up just like tarot cards, that would probably be the first one that came up. She is the reason that the tarot decks went from a kind of standard deck of cards that just had 4 suits in the way that regular decks of cards have, to each single image being completely individualized and packed full of all types of symbolism. That symbolism kind of coming from her background as an illustrator. She illustrated for many Caribbean folklore tales and things like that. She was also a part of the occult. She also was Catholic for a while. She's this really interesting shapeshifter in history. This is one of her paintings. She was a really close friend to Dracula's author, Bram Stoker, and poet William Butler Yeats. She's kind of this incredibly curious character that some people now have suspected that maybe she was Black, because she lived in Jamaica for a time and claimed to be Jamaican British. She's this fascinating shapeshifter character, and shapeshifting is so much how I think of things that I do in my practice and things that I appreciate about drag or about even going to church. The ways in which Black people present or peacock themselves in those spaces is really related to that as well. So I was also really looking into this as a resource of thinking about my own relationship to religion and understanding where different types of imagery would come from or sometimes have crossover into different systems of beliefs. And I was really interested in how tarot kind of hybridizes so many different things, including Catholic imagery. There's also some imagery that references some old like Dutch paintings. Yoga comes into things like that as well. And so I'm kind of inserting my own body into a lot of these paintings, or family members of mine, and I've titled this body of work after the Major Arcana's narrative that's told through those cards, which is called The Fool's Journey. I've been really fascinated with this idea of the fool as the protagonist of this journey, who encounters a number of other characters, and through those encounters learns, they impart wisdom onto him and provide him guidance through that journey all the way to the end, which is the world. So in these paintings, when they are characters that are not me, they are family members of mine. Sometimes they are just skeletons. Sorry about that, I jumped. And some of them are more true to the compositions than others. On the left of each slide, you're seeing the Mercier deck, and on the right, that is Pamela Coleman Smith's illustration. I'm also really interested in how astrology has become this thing that more people are sort of kind of using as everyday excuses for things, or also for self-identification and self-understanding and reflection. I took this opportunity in this painting to think about the orientation of a card and how that shift of that card can change its meaning, and how symbols can be something as simple as just the gesture of turning something upside down instead of actually, representing an object. These paintings are all a little bit taller, about a foot taller than me, and pretty wide. So they're large scale, they're all the same size. And it's really important to me that these all have larger than life-size bodies again. They're all mixed media. Here is one of the more recent ones of the chariot. You can also see some ancient Egyptian references as well in these. And in some of them, there are some personal references to things that I just grew up with and have kind of a love for. So this is a Gigi from Kiki's Delivery Service. In this one, in the Hanged Man, there is an old wallet of mine, an old identification with some keys to my old studio dangling from that. I think they changed the locks, so I think it's fine. But this one also has a popular culture reference, which most people might not recognize, but this is the Death Tarot card, and that hand is Rihanna's hand when I realized I didn't think she was going to ever release another album. And I felt like that felt like a death to me. I think it's a pretty notable hand. It's her tattoos on there, so some people might know that. I'm also really interested in how these cards also have sort of presented me with some of my own discomfort. This is the Devil Tarot card, and my own kind of Christian guilt and fear made me uncomfortable with the idea of making an image of a devil. And so, this is one where I've thought about remaking it and rethinking it. But yeah, this idea of a sort of goat-headed demon with pointed ears and a split tongue and horns and a pentagram on his head seemed a little intense, with two nude kind of sex slave Adam and Eve tethered to chains. It just seemed a little extreme to me at the time. And now that I've gone through this process of making this work, I don't know, I rethink it, and I might have a different approach making it now. This one is the World, which is the last in the series. I still have two more that I have not made yet, and they're in the progress of being made, but I'm really interested in actually making a fully usable and printed deck with a kind of Oracle deck expansion to kind of allow people to read for themselves and create new meaning and new understandings of different symbols that I put into these things and read into that themselves. I like work that can be kind of accessible and open to whatever other references that people might bring to the work themselves. And last thing I'll talk about really briefly, just because I didn't mention it, but I do have an entire sculptural practice where much of my sculptural work uses materials that reference spontaneous memorials. I grew up in Philadelphia, and this is a way, oftentimes people will have community coming together to mourn. So these works are dedicated to and in response to the murder of Trayvon Martin, the 17-year-old boy who was shot and killed by neighborhood watch captain George Zimmerman in a gated community in Florida. I had noticed after his death that in my neighborhood, these signs were put up outside of schools in predominantly Black neighborhoods advising teenagers and children in those neighborhoods not to wear hoodies. That image of Trayvon Martin became this widely disseminated image, and other images of him often was this shrouded figure that sort of represented danger in a way. And so it was a strange cyclical thing that was happening where a Black person wearing a hoodie became endangered themselves as opposed to the threat. And so it was really also something really interesting to me to see this David Hammond's piece in person and to be able to exhibit alongside it with my hoodie. This is In the Hood from 1993, and then thinking about how, 20 to 30 years later, that piece still resonates. I've made many of these works. I've made also other works using similar materials in response to other related deaths, but they are larger than a wearable size hoodie. Just to give you an idea of how large this is, that one is about twice my wingspan. I don't know the exact dimensions off the top of my head, but yeah, the other examples of work that you might see just out in the wild that inspired these works are spontaneous memorials like this, which are pretty common, a white bicycle that's kind of adorned outside with silk flowers, pictures left nearby. It's kind of a space of cultural negotiation of public grief. This is in Pittsburgh after the anti-Semitic terrorist attack that took place at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. People kind of brought, these are live flowers. This is of the Pulse nightclub, after the Pulse nightclub shooting. So I'm really referencing this way of communal mourning and coming together and creating these kind of ephemeral monuments to something lost. I will stop there because I think I am at about 35 minutes and I want to be able to have you guys ask me questions, but thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so very much, Devan. That was honestly wonderful to see the breadth of your work and hear about some of the influences behind it. Like I said, perhaps Pia and I will start off by asking you a couple of questions, and then anyone else who would like to, please feel free to jump in. Something that I was thinking as I was watching you present these works on a screen is that, of course, we only have them as a 2D image, and all works are better, I suppose, seen in real life. But something I was thinking about was that even though your paintings are often three-dimensional, and you kind of have to move around them, and they're so layered and textured, as you move around the sides, you've left the sides of your canvases blank. And I was wondering whether you think that relates in any way to how you're playing with fiction and films and mythology, but then your works are also coming out into the real world, into communities, how your fiction and non-fiction maybe relate in your works.
Yeah, I love fiction, specifically in thinking of, and I also love just how painting operates as, like, it's like almost like a screen, and so it is this flat thing that I'm challenging by adorning it with three-dimensional things. But I don't know, something about the, I think that might just be the painting training in me that prevents me from painting on the sides. I have no interest in the side of a painting at all. It's this strange thing where when I see sides of paintings being painted by other people, I'm way more interested in it than myself. I've seen some really interesting moments where people will continue a painting over onto the side, and it's this special little moment. There's artists that I really admire that are peers of mine. Haley Joseph has done it with this really great painting of like a woman sort of gazing out into the distance of the sunset, and the side of the painting, you actually see the sun on the water, but you don't see the sun on the front of the painting. And so when it's documented and people are only experiencing something in, on your phone or something, you miss that magical moment. Jonathan Lyndon Chase is another artist who does address the sides of the canvas sometimes, and there's fun notes or lyrics sometimes written on the sides or other extensions of the painting. And I feel like my sort of draw to getting people to experience something in real life, and that secret happens on the front. So I don't know. That's what's going on for me. Yeah.
I guess when I'm looking at them, it makes me think it situates it more as an image almost than as a painting that perhaps could it be situated in a fictional world? Or do you think you're, despite working with, say, mythology, trying to create like a new celebratory existence for those identities you're thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, I make a lot of work that is interested in mythology and magic, and I'm very much immersed in world building right now. And so yeah, certainly I think materially and content-wise, I think all of that is about fiction and world building and trying to create something that people can kind of use as a, like I like to think that when I was making a lot of the self-portraits, that those were less specifically about them looking like me or being about something that was specifically me, and more so using that as a kind of avatar to display a number of smaller magical moments, or to illustrate something outside of myself, but just using myself as a kind of character. Yeah.
If I may, my question kind of is related to what Alex started talking about earlier. One thing that I was struck by, and I unfortunately haven't seen any of your work yet in person, is it's obvious how incredibly elaborate your process is, and how much care you choose different materials. And so the lips, for example, I think they're really striking, and I think you mentioned earlier that they're often based on women that you grew up with, so they really, I think, look three-dimensional. So I wondered if, given the extraordinary care that you take in making these works and having so many different textures, if then being content with showing them to us as a digital version, is that just a compromise that you have to accept, or is the presence of the materialities a way of undermining what the digital world is about?
Yeah, I guess it's a little bit of both. I make work to be seen in person, but I'm highly aware that most people are experiencing my work through digital representations of that. I like to think of it as there's enough information even in an image of my work that you can tell that something is going on that you can't quite access through an image, and that's hopefully a draw for people to go see it when they can, if they are in proximity to it, to go run and try to see and experience that in person. And I think it's interesting because certainly that happens with my work because it's dimensional, but I think the same thing happens with even just like a picture of a flat two-dimensional painting. The scale of it can't quite be accurately represented. You can't experience it accurately because this is a projection of light, whereas the bouncing of light off of an object in person is quite different as well. So yeah, it's a little bit of a draw to get people to go see it in person for sure. And also there's hints of the scale sometimes, like in that painting of the Hanged Man where I'm hanging upside down by my foot. Those are just cargo pants that used to be my studio pants. So that just tells you like that's the size of that character. Yeah.
And have you experimented with different types of photography too? Like in the picture behind us, you can definitely see that there's the sequence. But I can't figure out what the hair is made from.
Oh, yeah.
So have you played with different types of photography to come in?
Yeah, I've had different people photograph my work over the years, and some people are better at it than others. And now my partner is like an incredible photographer who's the photography manager of the Carnegie Museum of Art, so he's like the best photographer, and he's like mastered, so he conveniently is able to capture it pretty well, and so he'll take a lot of detail shots, sometimes video footage, just to send to people if necessary, and sometimes I've shared that as well, just to give people a better idea. A lot of the time the glitter or the sequins are color shift, so there was actually a Chris O'Feely show. I don't know what works are in the Chris O'Feely show here. That's up right now. I think it's at the Tate Britain.
Is it?
I think there's a Chris O'Feely show. Yeah, go see it.
Where is it? Sorry, Angela?
Is it Herman Anderson?
Herman Anderson? No. Chris
No.
O'Feely?
I saw his name written when I stopped in. I was there briefly the other week. Maybe it's come down, but
He has a mural. Is that
Yeah.
wall painting?
maybe, yeah. He had if you don't know who he is, look him up, and then you'll see this. He had an exhibition a while ago at the New Museum, I think, or maybe the Whitney. But there was an entire room. I think the show was called Day and Night, and he had this room that was full of these blue paintings. And I bought the catalog because I was so enthralled by the show. You walk in, and it's all these paintings in this room, and everything is blue, but everything is color shift, so it's actually quite dimensional, and it almost like things reveal and disappear as you walk through the space. But then the pictures of the show are like it's like just these blue kind of blobs. So it's this weird thing where I have it like ingrained in my memory, and I go to look at the book and it's not at all, I can't even explain it. And so I love things like that. I love when artists make work that like is just impossible to understand on a phone. Yeah, I admire people who do that.
That's kind of subversive.
Yeah, yeah.
Great. Do you have any questions from our audience? Yes, please.
Thank you for that, Devan. Would you describe yourself, would you put yourself in the category of a black artist, a queer artist, a spiritual artist, or a political artist, or are those all not helpful boxes?
Thank you for that. I haven't been asked that. I've thought about this before. It's something where, and I've heard other people express kind of, who identify similarly to me, I've heard people express that they don't want to be sort of categorized or boxed into something. And for me, I hear that, but I actually was really inspired by something that another artist who inspires me, Jeffrey Gibson, said about something similar. This idea of being boxed in as an indigenous artist or something like that isn't quite a box in a restrictive way, but it's an incredible place to be and to be able to be categorized that way because you're celebrating it and you are a part of a history. You also are being able to be a voice for so many people and represent them and be an example of that for people to inspire others to participate similarly and make work. And so I love all of those categories and I don't mind any of them. All of them I would accept and be more than happy to identify as them. So, yeah.
This is absolutely wonderful. Thank you very much. Just a question for you. So, like, your work looks in these photographs very polished, precise, and it seems like you're making a lot of decisions as to what you're presenting to us. And one thing I was thinking about in your paintings that you went through with the tarot card series, where you've got bodies, you know, whether it's half portrait or quarter length. Where do you kind of? There were some portraits where the face is clearly very detailed or more detailed, and then it fades away through the body. And what choices are you thinking about in terms of how much of that anatomy to give us? Is that something important, and do you find that including sequins and other materials can kind of let the eye do something different rather than be given everything about the body itself?
Yeah, thank you. I make those decisions as I go. For me, it's I always find it important to represent a lot of the facial features. Sometimes I'll show the hands. For me, it's more so important that the gradient, it used to be more of a thing where I would use the gradient as an opportunity to kind of direct the viewer in a way to point to certain things. So there would be like kind of hot zones in the body. So if I wanted you to pay attention to the hand pointing at something, the hand might be brighter or more orange and a yellow or something like that. So yeah, sort of like temperature zones in the body. I gradually started to think of the gradient as just more of an opportunity to think of it as like what a gradient is, as something infinite, but contained within a body. And so for me, that I also think of it as like, as the gradient goes down the body, it gets more opaque. So you see less of the sort of definition of form. And so I think of it as physical weight, and then a more cognitive or heady, lightheaded airiness towards the top, where you start to see the figure take more form in a way. And so I started to think of it that way. So it's kind of a thinking of these figures as these kind of, as you can see, most of them have kind of this dazed expression. It's a lightheadedness where they're kind of accessing some other realm or plane mentally, and their bodies are more grounded and opaque and heavier.
Any other questions? Oh, Joe.
I wanted to ask you about the Dungeons and Dragons.
Oh, yeah.
Continuing the theme of transformation, and I guess there's a form of drag or play that goes on in some way with that. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, the past few years I've been really intensely playing tabletop role-playing games with other artist friends of mine, and it's been this really generative thing because I've always been really, I've done a lot of world building, which is not quite full-on writing, but it is involved in writing in some ways, but character designs and things like that, and creating fictional universes and worlds in which I can sort of enter into to create imagery from, and I've been really wanting to use tabletop role-playing games, either pre-existing ones or create my own, as a way to generate more ways to find ways to bring people into my practice and to create new unexpected types of imagery or characters or strange occurrences, ways in which to challenge ideas that I've had or that boundaries that I've set up. And so I'm currently creating a module that I'll use for tabletop role-playing game mechanics that pre-exist. So Dungeons and Dragons is a more complex game. I'd like this to be much simpler, and there are other games that already exist that I can kind of use their pre-existing mechanics, but use my world that I've created and bring groups of people, small groups, 3 to 5 people, to play different games within that world and have them participating in character design, finding their character voice, creating strange, unusual occurrences, and they'll participate in things like taking down a tyrannical government or enacting a heist or something like that. One of the ones I'm really excited about is I've reread many times The Book of Martha by Octavia Butler, which is a short story where she talks about she has this character named Martha who wakes up in this white expanse room, and she thinks she's dead, but she hasn't died. God comes up to her and initially presents himself one way. He looks how she thinks or is used to thinking of how God might look. So he's this really large white man, long beard, robes. And he says, I only look like this because that's what you think and it's the most comfortable for you. You're not dead. I just need you to make one change, on the planet, and you can go back to your normal life and you won't remember any of this. And she has this back and forth conversation with him, and slowly and gradually the kind of scenery changes around her to become more comfortable and familiar. And eventually God turns into a black woman that almost looks just like her, and she makes her decision and makes her change, and then she wakes up and forgets. But she goes through this, it's a really interesting setup for me that I think is really curious, and I'm interested in creating a world in which I do the same thing and allow people to come in and create a change within those confines and then leave that world. So they'll create a character, come in, create a change, and then leave. And I'm really interested in creating work from those moments. Yeah.
Paintings,
Yeah, so there'll be imagery, either illustrations or paintings, certainly illustrations, maybe even some sequential imagery, comics or something like that as well. I've been looking at a lot of Kerry James Marshall comics and other artists who make work in that way. And so, yeah, I've been really interested in finding ways to be more participatory in my practice. I think it's really exciting and generative, and getting people to come in and be weird together seems really enticing. So, yeah.
I have a slightly similar question, actually. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about the work that you've been producing in the month that you've been here.
Yeah, for me it's been a funny month because I've just been making these really, really detailed, gigantic portraits of various Dungeons and Dragons characters that I've played, and so it's like fan art of those characters, and it's really fun to have made them because they are characters that are Dungeons and Dragons, generally speaking, is having a kind of resurgence and become quite popular in a lot of ways. I think there's like a group that did a live gameplay at Madison Square Garden and sold it out for 2 nights, and so it's a really big thing, but it's still largely white, and so creating these characters that are intentionally queer or intentionally black, or sometimes I'll play a totally just bizarro character. Sometimes they're more like me than not. And so it's really fun to kind of just like be a character that shouldn't be the way it is in this world, but in the way that's set up, and kind of push at those boundaries and see what happens. And so I'm trying to celebrate some of those fantasy characters. And I'm taking a lot of inspiration from, I've walked around the National Gallery, and so some of those portraits have a similar aesthetic in terms of their outfits. And so I've taken some of the armor elements or some of the fancy collars and things like that as well. Yeah.
Do we have more questions?
Maybe I can quickly ask something to follow on. Well, actually, there are just so many thoughts that have been coming together. But the Dungeons and Dragons, but also the tarot cards, like this idea of play, I feel like is so apt to think about when you're thinking about your work. But then you also spoke about weirdness, and I guess there's also joy in them, isn't there? Like, I think you've also spoken about not wanting to depict black pain or suffering. And I was wondering how that relates, or if we could hear more of your thoughts on that and how that relates to maybe a political register or dimension of your works.
Yeah, I don't have as much interest in showing black bodies in torment or in pain. I've depicted them crying often as a more a gesture of decompressing and release, or it's sort of a catharsis, kind of a cathartic release. And I think for me, it's just even though I'm now participating in something that involves a lot of violence, fictional violence, of course, and the characters that I'm playing are often not quite black. They might be, I don't know, like an orc or a half orc or something like that. So, not quite black, but black coded in some ways. So there are ways in which I think about how some fiction uses a kind of surrogate for people of color or for queer people to then depict that pain. And in my own practice, how I use a surrogate of, like, instead of showing the pain, I show ways in which the healing happens, or ways. I was just talking about how Avatar, those movies are kind of just like, it's like Pocahontas, but like in space, and but it's like, instead of indigenous people, just make them aliens, and it's like, it's just, that's more relatable somehow for people to sort of be able to empathize or sympathize with something, is to remove the thing that's harder to look at and replace it with something prettier or more fantastical. And so using beauty or something shiny and glitzy, or something fictional and fun, or weird or curious, as a way to draw people in to think critically about something difficult.
I was noticed that the series of memorial works that you've done, they sort of stand a little bit aside from most of like your mainstream kind of work. Can you sort of expand a little bit more about the inspiration behind that? What sort of led you to sort of depart from your more mainstream style in order to create these works?
Yeah, thank you. They are, I have made those works kind of concurrently in the studio alongside many of the paintings, actually, and so they are an ongoing thing that I return to from time to time. And I've made, one project was a quite large commissioned installation work in the same vein of 4 utility poles, electrical lines, with shoes dangling from them, and the same materials, rhinestones and silk flowers and things like that. It was for this exhibition at the Smithsonian titled Features. It's interesting sometimes when I show this work, usually I show these works alongside a body of paintings. So it's almost for me a way of circling back from the sort of fantasy elements in the paintings back to something more grounded and tethered to some of the harsher realities, but without showing you an image of those harsh realities. And so I'll usually have one or two of the sculptures in an exhibition full of the paintings. The one time I've shown that installation was totally removed from any of my paintings and was quite unusual, and so I'm still wrestling with how I feel about it sort of as a standalone piece. But yeah, it is, for me, just a necessary thing to do sometimes, because I am making work that is very, I'm following my own whims from time to time, and it feels very lighthearted sometimes, or fun and whimsical to me. And I think it's also important for me to ground it again and bring people back to, I don't know, something that seems useful.
And it makes more sense in a way to you for them to be exhibited alongside some of the other works rather than set aside, as in a way it sort of gives them context or contrast?
Yeah, both context and contrast. I think through that contrast, the context is more, it is strengthened. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. If there are no other burning questions, then I would. Oh, there's one more. Regina.
Hi, this might be a simple question, but would you consider yourself to be like a very nostalgic artist person? Because I've noticed like in your work you talk about a lot about like places you've grown up in, people who have influenced you, things you've enjoyed when you were younger. And would you say that that has like a very impactful insight in your art, in your creative process? Yeah.
That's not the simplest question, so I commend you for that. I think, yes, in some ways. I don't know, nostalgia is a weird thing, but it can be uncomfortable, I think, in that it really roots what I'm making in a very specific time, and sometimes that can be embarrassing, or it can age a person, so, but I kind of love that, so I don't mind that, but I'm also making some things that are about what I'm really into right now. And I'm doing that more so I'm entering into a space of doing that right now. And I think that to me feels scarier than making work about what I enjoyed when I was younger. Most of my paintings, I like to think that I'm making them with a younger version of myself in mind, that he might like these. And like to be able to see these. So I do think that nostalgia does play a part in some of that, but I find more discomfort in the idea of making something so contemporary that it's like literally right now, in response to something that just happened. It feels so high risk. I commend people that do that, like hats off to you. It's because your mind can change so quickly, and to be able to be so brave to share something so concrete that's still maybe marinating in the public consciousness is so risky. Yeah, so not quite nostalgia per se, but more so just paying homage to a younger version of myself. Yeah.
Thank you, Devan.
Thank you, everyone. With that, on a happy note,
Yeah.
think about our younger selves. Let's please all continue the conversation over in the research rooms, and let us thank Devan again for one.